Welcome to Talk of the Bay, KSQD's local news program brought to you every weekday at 5 p.m. I'm your host, Suki Wessling, and today will hopefully not be a waste of your time. A pile of new environmental laws are coming our way in California since Governor Newsom signed this session's bills. Although the effects of many of them will be felt slowly, one change has already come to your kitchen: the new food scrap composting law. Many of us have a new bin to add to our kitchen decor, but how important is this change? Which other laws are going to affect how we eat and live? How will these laws change how businesses package and sell their goods? Joining me today are two experts in waste management who will speak about how these new laws will change our relationship with waste locally, statewide, and even internationally. Leslie O'Malley is a discard management professional specializing in waste reduction strategies and recycling processes. She joined the City of Santa Cruz in 2016 and has developed and implemented various programs, including an industry award-winning Master Recycler volunteer training program. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you. It's nice to be here today.
And Tim Goncharoff is well known in our area for leading many waste reduction and environmental protection efforts, including groundbreaking programs on everything from plastic bags to pharmaceuticals, needles, and composting. For years, Santa Cruz County's Zero Waste Programs Manager, Tim now heads up consulting firm Clements Environmental. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Suki. Great to be here. And Leslie, great to hear your voice again.
Let's start by talking about food scraps. I'm guessing that most people don't know what a significant portion of our refuse is food scraps and what a huge impact this will make. So, Leslie, can you start by talking about the City of Santa Cruz?
Sure. So we've been warming up to this new legislation, SB 1383, for a few years now. And most people think of food scraps and food waste as sort of the same thing, but we think they're a little bit different. And ideally, food scraps are really skins and stems and shells and seeds and, just the unedible parts. But the reality is that we all, are guilty of over purchasing and letting things go bad sometimes, and so then that's where it becomes food waste. But whatever you call it, food scraps, food waste, we've now implemented new programs to get that out of the landfill, which for us at a recent waste characterization study was about 25% of the contents of our landfill, and that seems to be the case in California and nationwide.
Okay. And yeah, I read that it was up to 40%, but I suppose that's in the places where people throw away the most food.
Yeah.
So we're a little bit better than average, I guess. So in Santa Cruz now, how are the scraps collected?
So we, for single-family residential, which is the kind of the biggest and most newsworthy and visual thing that people are seeing around this city, is we rolled out with a food scrap only collection system, and that's a 6-gallon pail with a locking lid and a handle, and residents fill that up. It's food only. There's no tea bags, no coffee filters, no bio bags, because it is not going to composting. They put that out by the curb, and then we have crews that come by and they hand collect it, tip it into a larger container, take it in, put it in their trucks, and then take it up to Demio Lane, our resource recovery facility, where we've invested in a pre-processor over the last 3 years, and it starts its journey there.
And what's a pre-processor?
So it's a series of machinery. I just give a little shout out to a recent article that an author did in Santa Cruz Local, which I think he did a really fabulous job sort of painting a picture of how the mechanicals work, which is great because most people are so familiar with the idea of turning our food scraps into soil and compost. And so it goes through a series of machinery, and it gets turned into a mash. And as we know, when you add all colors of the rainbow together, you get a beautiful brown. So it looks like brown applesauce, and then that gets built up over time, and about every 10 days it gets trucked over to Santa Clara to a facility where it undergoes further processing.
Okay. And so when when we buy these things that say that they're compostable, like the bags or the packages, what in what universe are they compostable? If what would you have to do as a city to collect that and compost it?
Well, we would have to send it to an industrial composting facility, and the closest one in the region is down towards Monterey at Marina. And our neighbors around us are taking advantage of that opportunity. It didn't pencil out for us, but that is the confusion, and you nailed it, because consumers rely on labeling and packaging and clues to what they're supposed to do with stuff, and some stuff is genuinely compostable in an industrial composting facility, but not all of it, and it can be confusing because it looks very similar to petroleum-based plastics or bioplastics and stuff. So it's not backyard composting in most cases.
Yeah, and it is really confusing, and I feel like I pay a lot more attention than I know a lot of people do, because it's something I'm interested in. And yet, even then, it's like you buy these bags. Are they compostable, or are they made from, post recycled? It's like all these different things, and we all are trying to do our best, but it's a little complicated. So what sort of compliance are you seeing from people in the city?
We're seeing really pretty high, I have to say. We're still working on getting all our businesses on board, and then working to get the multifamily. That'll look a little different. It'll be one bigger container that the residents in multifamily will transfer into. But for single family residential, like any new program being rolled out, there's certainly some hiccups and some opportunities for us to learn and adapt. But we're getting really good feedback. I think people are solution oriented. We are so excited to offer this because we were getting calls for several years now. When is the city of Santa Cruz going to start collecting, And so I think by and large it's been well received. People are putting their pails out and it's getting collected, and just the tonnages we're processing between our single family residential, the multifamily we have in commercial, we're processing about 40 tons of collected food scraps a week. So for a city with our size, that's pretty good. Ideally, in a perfect world, it would be a really low number with really high participation. And so I think that becomes the opportunity to sort of help people realize, what's going in that food scrap collection pail. Why is it going in there? Was there an opportunity to maybe give it a little more life, or to prevent that food waste in the first place?
Okay, well, it's good to hear that there's some good compliance, because that's one of that's key, of course, is to get people to actually do things. And just despite what people might think, not everyone always follows laws. Interesting. So, so Tim, I wanted to ask you, you were for years the county zero waste programs manager. And so maybe you could explain, I live in the county and my composting is rather different. So why is it different for green waste as opposed to City of Santa Cruz?
Well, there's a few reasons. Some of it is just geography. The county, of course, is much larger than the city of Santa Cruz. A lot of it is very rural. So, getting to everybody has been a challenge. Although I'm happy to report that almost everybody in the county now has access to food waste collection. Another difference is that the county got a big head start on this. The county of Santa Cruz has been composting food waste since, I believe it was 2006. This is something that, as Leslie said, local people have been asking for a long time. So we didn't wait for the state mandate. We got out in front of it. And by the time the state mandate kicked in, almost all of our businesses were already participating. So we've been collecting large quantities of food waste for a long time. And because of that, we decided to go with a large commercial scale composting operation, which, as Leslie mentioned, is down in Monterey County, operating at several different locations. One of the nice things about that kind of compost operation is that they can handle a lot of stuff that won't work in your backyard composting, that you may not want in in animal feed as the city's material goes to. So things like pizza boxes, compostable cutlery or packaging, just about anything organic can go into your green bin, which is how the county collects it. It's not a separate bin. It just goes in the green bin along with your leaves and lawn clippings, and that gets collected and hauled down for composting.
Okay,
so we could
wait.
go on about that, but that's the short answer.
Well, okay, so I thought, now maybe I misread green waste instructions, but I thought they said no paper, and the bin they gave us says no paper on it.
That's because they want your paper in the recycling. So it's not helpful to get a compost bin that's full of paper, because you want your compost to be a nice balance of ideally food waste, leaves, lawn clippings, twigs, that sort of thing. A lot of paper can throw that off, but a little bit doesn't hurt it.
So like a paper towel that has goop on it.
If you've got a soiled paper towel, you know that can't go into your recycling bin. Or if you've got a grease-soaked pizza box, same story. But you don't have to throw those in the trash. Those can go into the compost. So the goal is to eventually have nothing go to the landfill. We're not quite there, but we're on our way.
That's really interesting to hear, because like I said, I try to be really pay attention to these things, and I apparently miss that. So one of the things that I love, we home compost anyway with worms, but one of the things that's great about being able to put it in the green bin is that there's plenty of things that worms do not like, or that they eat last. So avocado skins, that sort of thing. So it's nice to now have everything being composted.
Indeed, and I'll add that a lot of people who do backyard composting have learned that you don't put things like meat or bones or animal waste or some of the problematic materials in that, but the commercial scale composting operations can handle that. It operates at much higher temperatures. It breaks things down much more effectively. So throw it in the green bin. We will turn it into nice, new, beautiful soil and close the cycle right here in Santa Cruz County.
Wow. And so you're saying that if somebody puts their dog poo in compostable bags, they can put it in the green bin?
Yeah. And part of the answer is to be mindful of quantity, just like with paper. If they
You'd have to have a whole lot of dogs
full of animal waste, that would be a problem. We don't see it so much with dogs, but sometimes we hear from people with horses, for example, have been saving up and want to know if they can get rid of a couple of tons of horse waste that way. And we tell them, no, that's really not the best answer.
Yeah, okay.
But, for the most part, it's just regular household food waste, and that's fine.
Okay. What about cat litter in compostable bags?
Cat litter is a special case. And Leslie, I know that you have done some work on that. Do you want to talk about the issues with cat litter? If not, I will.
Well, just that it can contain, I forget the name of the virus, but we don't want it mixing with soil. And since curbside composting is going to be all mixed in, then it just perpetuates that.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Is it toxoplasmosis?
Cats carry a virus that actually can be fatal to sea otters. And learning about that was a painful lesson.
Wow.
So cat litter is something that should still go in the trash.
Go in the garbage. Okay. Listeners, you are listening to KSQD, and I am speaking with two experts on waste, Leslie O'Malley, City of Santa Cruz Waste Reduction Manager, and Tim Goncharoff of Clements Environmental. And we are talking about a host of new waste reduction laws that will affect not only Californians, but perhaps people all around the world. So we've been talking specifically about composting, and I want to round that up before we go on to ask you, what sort of impact you mentioned, Tim, that everything being turned into this nice soil. So we're going from the status quo, which was a whole lot of food mixed in with stuff at the dump, just sitting there and making a whole lot of nasty gases, I assume, now is going to be nice, beautiful, healthy soil that people can use. So long term, what sort of impact are we looking at?
There will be positive impacts in all kinds of ways. And I'm glad you brought up the bigger purpose of this. And of course, the largest goal behind this is to do something about climate change. If you look at the big factors in driving climate change, there are things like transportation, of course, automobiles and all their emissions, power plants, buildings. But if you narrow down and look at local governments and what do they do that contributes to climate change, it turns out that the biggest impact is solid waste operations. It's landfills. Landfills in their traditional configuration generate a ton of gases, and particularly methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. So it's important that we do everything we can to reduce the production of methane. And if you bury food and other organic material in a landfill, it turns into methane. And these days, many landfills, including all the local ones, have methane wells that capture a lot of that and turn it into energy, which is great. But you never get it all. Some leaks. And of course, even when you turn it into energy, that methane turns into carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas of its own. So the best thing is just to prevent that stuff ever going in the ground. Used to be that, farmers and others just naturally returned their scraps to the soil in the form of fertilizer. And we're trying to get back to that. Not only is it returning nutrients to the soil, but adding compost increases the water retention ability of the soil. Because of all the biotic activity that happens there, it actually increases the amount of carbon that you can sequester in the soil. So the soil itself draws carbon out of the air and holds it. So composting is a win-win in many different ways.
Wow. Okay. And Leslie, in the city, what sort of impact are you hoping the new law to have there?
I think one of the best things is that it's just bringing attention to, for the people that it wasn't really on their radar of, the benefits of getting the food waste out of the landfill. The city has had a pretty successful yard waste collection program for the last 20 years. And so we've been collecting that and keeping that out of the landfill. And that's some of the organics. Part of it is the way we're doing it by collecting food scraps only, then we get to keep that relationship that we have with a local farmer who uses that mulch. But I think there'll be a variety of benefits. And for us, the route that we've chosen to go with turning the food scraps into a mash, that the long-term strategy is to send it to the wastewater treatment facility. So it keeps it in our own waste shed, if you will, and a lot closer to home, and we can incorporate the energy there. So that's one of the biggest benefits for us.
Okay. Yeah. And both of you are talking about things that some of it used to be what we called common sense. I know that I grew up with a dad who had a huge compost pile and everything went on the compost pile, and he's still doing it at 90. And in urban Oakland. So it was something that we did. And then as our cities grew and our governments grew, we didn't adapt many of these things to how we did things when our communities got more complicated. And so, Tim, I wanted to ask you, I know you follow the legal stuff closely. It seems like the food scraps law, like many environmental laws, took a long time coming. So can you explain why these laws take so long to, both of you said something about our customers have been asking for this. Why does it take so long?
Living in a place like Santa Cruz, you get used to just about everybody being concerned about the environment, wanting to do whatever they can to protect it, wanting to combat climate change. But if you travel just a short distance inland, you'll find parts of California where they think climate change is a hoax, where they're suspicious of any government programs, where any law that's going to require people to change their behavior is regarded with a lot of suspicion, especially if it's going to cost money. So it can be a real challenge getting enough votes to get new programs, especially major new programs, across the finish line. The good news is that seems to be changing. For years, we have considered it a successful year if we got one significant environmental bill across the governor's desk and passed into law. Just the last few years, things have really picked up steam. At least in California, even the more conservative representatives realize climate change is real. It's having impacts today. I think that the giant fires we've had have been very persuasive. So there is a willingness to engage with this and to do significant things to make a difference. And this year has been just a whirlwind of successful environmental legislation, not just at the state level, but at the national level, which is something we haven't seen in a long time. So it's very exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting to me because, California has, of course, the reputation nationwide of being this really lefty liberal state. But really, when you look at how much has been passed just in the last year compared to what has been done previously, it sort of makes us look like we were sitting around waiting for things to get worse and worse. So maybe, and I guess this is human nature to a certain extent. We politicians want to wait until people see the problem and understand the problem so that they're then grateful that the politicians are trying to fix the problem.
And it's important to remember that there are always people invested in the way things are. I think most people now accept that we need to get off of fossil fuels as quickly as possible. But some of the world's wealthiest, most powerful corporations sell fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. And they will fight that change as long as they possibly can. They can make lots of contributions to campaign war chests. They have a lot of influence. I spent a lot of time in the Capitol in Sacramento. And for every person like me there talking to elected officials about environmental issues, there are at least 20 telling them all, this is a terrible idea. What are you doing? You're crazy. And so it's always an uphill battle. We will never have the kind of resources that those corporations do. But I think they're starting to see the writing on the wall. They're understanding that change is coming, and it's better to be at the table and helping to shape it than to just dig in your heels and say no all the time. Mm-hmm. So that's been a factor as well. I work frequently with some of the large corporations that people might not realize are opening their eyes to climate change and other environmental issues. And they're becoming much more cooperative and have been helpful. Is something that I often tell people who are working on new programs is that people who run businesses will always know more about their business than you do. And if you want to craft a program that will affect them, you do well to listen to them. You might end up with a better program. Mm-hmm. So we've developed some great partnerships, and it's built trust over time, and we're able to, build on that and get more done year by year. So mm-hmm. I'm optimistic.
Yeah, and you mentioned the corporations and the energy companies, and I've read, I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, that in fact quietly, while they're yelling about how climate change is not caused by fossil fuels, et cetera, and giving money to politicians, asking them not to do any of these changes, the energy companies are actually investing heavily in renewables.
How about that?
So, yeah,
Well, they see the writing on the wall. I mean,
exactly.
California is phasing out fossil fuel vehicles, and it's a huge part of the national market.
Hmm.
And there are lots of other things moving in that direction. Wind and solar power are growing at astronomical rates. There is money to be made.
Yeah.
And so, of course, they want a piece of that pie.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, what I do want to move on to talk about a whole bunch of the other laws that are coming down that are all in one way or another waste related. And but before I do, and just sticking with the question about how we get people to change their attitudes. Leslie, you sent me a link to a website, savethefood.com, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what you think is the best way to reach people and get them to change their attitudes about waste.
Sure. I think, you have to meet people where they are, and different things are going to motivate different people. I think as we're kind of in, economic headwinds, anybody can appreciate the cost savings that comes with reducing waste in any form in their life. And there's statistics that say the average family of four wastes about $1,600 a year on food that it's never eaten. And so that equates to dropping one bag of groceries in the parking lot and driving away, if you kind of think about it that way. And so I think if people can sort of relate to the waste of money if they're wasting food. And so I really like that savethefood.com website because there's lots of great tips and tools about how to plan your meals, how to shop, how to store and preserve your food to make it last longer. We're getting closer to the holidays, and with Thanksgiving coming up, there's a part on that tool called the guesstimator, and you could put in, I'm having 10 guests, and most of them are going to eat turkey, and it could really help you fine-tune your shopping list so that you don't over-purchase and try to please every palate and have a lot, to put into either that food scrap collection or food scrap or composting program. Mm-hmm. So it's great that we're getting it at the curb. That is awesome news. But what I really encourage and I'd love to see is where people really start to look at how much is going into that pail. It's sort of like, the awakening we've had with recycling, and I'm sure Tim will touch on this a little bit with the great new policies coming through. But, it's the ideal really zero waste is generating, I don't think we can recycle and compost our way to it. And so it really comes down to reducing that waste. And some of the posts we see on social media is when people say, wow, looking at this 6-gallon pail of food, I can see how much food my family is wasting, mm-hmm. And make them, they're re-examining their shopping habits. So I think that, if people, whatever their connection is, and as Tim said, we are really lucky in Santa Cruz because people lead with, by and large, sustainability in mind, and it's much easier at industry events. People, will say, and I'm sure Tim found this, too, is, oh, you're so lucky. It must be so easy in Santa Cruz because everyone's on board. And I'd say, by and large, that's the case. That mm-hmm. they're really savvy and they're aware of a lot of these things. So it does definitely make our work easy. But I would just say it's looking for those connections of how do we reduce the food waste first. That's the absolute best thing on the food waste hierarchy. And then how do we process it as close to home as possible and save those miles, from driving it. And that's, the backyard mm-hmm. Composting sort of thing.
So, Tim, let's get back to you. You were just about to build on what Leslie said about changing attitudes about waste.
Thanks, Suki. Leslie was talking about how much food we all waste in our homes and how much better we could do. But there's also a lot of food wasted at every step in the production cycle, and that's invisible to most of us. The same law, SB 1383, that is now requiring the diversion of food waste all across California, also requires that we step up our efforts at what they call food rescue. It has been common for a long time for trucks to show up at landfills full of perfectly edible food. Sometimes it comes from restaurants that just had too much stuff at the end of the day. Farmers, they often decide a couple of years ahead of time how much of which crop they're going to plant. And then the market can surprise them. Suddenly you've got 20 tons of extra cauliflower or carrots or lettuce, and you can't sell it. So what do? You take it to the landfill. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
Now, there are a lot of organizations throughout California that are trying to capture that food and make sure it gets to the people who need it. And we have outstanding groups doing that work in Santa Cruz County. A lot of people know about Second Harvest or the Gray Bears. They're a couple of the biggest, but there are dozens of others. And so the state is now providing assistance and organization. So those kinds of efforts can be more coordinated and increase the amount of food that they are rescuing from every step in the food chain and making sure it gets to the people who need it. So we're seeing a lot less of that kind of food coming to the landfill, a lot more hungry people getting good food. So it's a win-win on every level.
That's great. That's really great. And yeah, I mean, just speaking from, my kids are young adults now, and thinking about back when they were younger, it would just be horrifying how I would, go to, I'd love to say that I cleaned out my fridge every week. I do now that it's just me and my husband. However, the amount of stuff that we ended up having to throw out was really hard on me. And now I think maybe because, when you have stuff like you have that bin in your kitchen, it's a good reminder. So I want to move to talking about some of the California laws that, because of the outsized influence of our large economy, will change the waste stream in this country and abroad. So, Tim, I wanted to ask you about this one because it's one of the ones that's most exciting to me because it has to do with a huge bugaboo I have: waste in packaging. Sometimes I'm frankly shocked by what arrives on my front porch. And although I'm really aware of shopping local, and I do it as much as possible, these days with Amazon and the consolidation of businesses, it's often impossible or very difficult to buy something locally. And then even when you do find it locally, you still get something that is way over packaged in materials that are, well, they have a symbol on them, but they're functionally not recyclable. So talk us through SB 54.
I'd be delighted. And we could easily spend a whole hour on that, so I'm just going to hit some highlights. First, I want to say how excited I am that California has passed this enormous comprehensive law that is going to be a huge game changer. What SB 54 does is kind of turn the game around. Instead of leaving waste up to consumers and local governments to deal with, it tells the companies that produce this stuff, wait a minute, you're creating this problem. You need to solve it. So, for example, all of the packaging that all those boxes show up on your front porch in has to be recyclable or compostable no later than 2032, all of it. And beyond that, they have to reduce how much stuff they're sending. They have to cut plastic packaging by 25% within 10 years, and that ramps up over time until it's a much higher percentage. Within 10 years, those companies have to demonstrate that 65% of all their single-use plastic packaging is being properly recycled. And it goes on and on.
So they have to prove that it's being recycled,
right?
Not just that it's recyclable.
Exactly. And that's a real game changer. And it holds them responsible. There are enormous penalties if they don't meet these benchmarks. So they can accomplish this in various ways. They can use less packaging. They can get more efficient about it. They can use more easily recyclable packaging. They can take it back. I mean, just imagine if all of those Amazon packages, for example, and I'll pick on them because they're by far the biggest.
Yes.
Imagine you could pack those all back in another Amazon box and send it back to the company.
I know. I have
Let them deal with it.
Yeah, I have this vision of, when I was a kid, we used to go visit my mom's tiny hometown in the coal country of Pennsylvania. And they had a local company that made chips and pretzels and delivered door to door the way that companies used to do. And these days it's coming back, and it's sort of funny. It's old fashioned and it's new again. In these wonderful reusable tins. And of course, we just loved this. This is so cool. And we had milk that came in glass bottles where I lived. But this idea that, you know, we can reuse things. You can make durable packaging that snaps shut and then gets shipped to someone, and then they just leave it out the way that, you know, if the post office delivers your held mail, if you go on vacation, they leave it in a plastic bin, and then you leave the plastic bin out and they take it, right?
Right.
Why would they put it in a cardboard box, whether it's recyclable or not? It makes no sense.
Exactly. And I think it's important to realize what a paradigm change this is. This is an example of what some people refer to as the circular economy, or it's got a more technical term, extended producer responsibility. That says if you create the problem, then it's up to you to solve it. Another example that Santa Cruz folks might be familiar with is recently pharmaceutical companies became responsible for collecting all the leftover pharmaceuticals and needles that were piling up in people's medicine cabinets, making sure those are properly disposed of and paying for it. Mm-hmm. You know, these are huge billion-dollar companies. Why should this end up on the shoulders of local taxpayers? So now companies like Amazon and the other big producers, the people who make the products they sell, it's going to be up to them to reduce the waste stream. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to see a lot more laws like this. It's very exciting.
So, Leslie, let's take this local. What do you, when you hear this, what do you see for the future of garbage collection in Santa Cruz City?
Well, I think it just the more alignment of definitions that everyone's operating by, the more streamlined, it just reduces the confusion to the customer. So that is a benefit. I think, as Tim's speaking to with the, you know, impact on corporations in some of the new legislation, you'll see an influx of funding into the infrastructure to improve recycling facilities and technology. You know, it's easy to think that recycling is just a blue bin and a magic portal to the land of away, and you know, there's so much more to it. And we during the summertime we give tours of our facility up at Dimeo, and we were so excited to be back to in-person tours this year, and people really just stand there in awe seeing the machinery. We don't have, you know, quite the high-tech machinery as other facilities, but it's still the same sort of collection, sort, bale, ship out. And when people understand the pieces that go behind that, and when you put something in a blue recycling bin, it's just starting its journey. And so I think the more we can sort of streamline and get on the same page with manufacturers and MRFs, material recovery facilities, where all that material is sorted and sent out and made into new things, I think it's a really exciting time. You know, it's easy to give up on recycling. There's a lot of headlines, especially since National Sword. That was when China stopped taking our stuff in 2017-18, is that, oh, recycling doesn't work. And I think that conversation tends to fall around curbside recycling and plastics, but we certainly can't give up on recycling. There's so many resources that we get out of keeping materials moving, like aluminum cans, you know, that it's a much bigger conversation. So I think it's a very exciting time for recycling. You know, I think we just have to remember we all grew up with reduce, reuse, recycle, and they come in that order for a reason, and they're all, you know, just as important.
Yeah. And so let's talk about some of the other laws. And Tim, maybe I'll just ask you to pick out your favorite one that you think is really going to especially impact people, what people will see in their daily lives.
Well, I have to mention one with a local connection. Many of your listeners know State Senator John Laird, who's been doing wonderful environmental protection work for many years, beginning on the Santa Cruz City Council and progressing through many other important positions. But now he's a state senator, And he wrote Senate Bill 1020, which was just signed by the governor. This is another very transformational new law. It requires that 90% of California's electricity comes from renewable energy sources, basically wind, solar, water power, by 2035. Mm-hmm. That's only 13 years away. 90%, mm-hmm. 95% by 2040, and 100% clean green power by 2045. That's huge. Not only does it set a really ambitious goal, but it's displaying faith and confidence that we can get there. There's been a lot of doubters about the shift away from fossil fuels, but California believes in it, mm-hmm. and we're going to show the way on this issue as we have on so many others. And I want to thank John Laird for taking the lead once again. It's a tremendous advance. I have to mention Governor Newsom's California climate commitment. This is an echo of the program that was just passed in Congress, but on the state level, it will invest $54 billion over 10 years in various climate change reduction projects. It's expected to create as many as 4 million new jobs in everything from building more electric cars to putting up more windmills and dozens of other things. Taking it back to waste reduction and composting, it's also going to help fund some of these other changes that we're talking about, which can be very expensive. People don't always realize that backyard composting doesn't scale up very well. Mm-hmm. And what happens at the large commercial level is a much more complicated, more technology intense, and more expensive thing to do. So this law, as well as the new federal bill, is going to help with some of those expenses, help cities and counties get cleaner and greener. Uh-huh. There are laws to improve our recycling system, which we were just talking about. New laws to cut back on oil drilling in California, which not everybody realizes is one of the largest oil producing states in the country.
I want to, right before we go on to the question of the national laws, which definitely are important, I want to just hit on this really, I think, important thing about California's economy and the effect that these laws that we've been discussing are going to have. And one thing I just was in the newspaper this morning related to what you were talking about just now, Tim, about the renewable energy law, that they are seeing manufacturing jobs suddenly skyrocket in the U.S. But guess what? Not in the traditional middle states, areas where we used to have lots of manufacturing. It's on the coasts, and it's because of renewables and all of these things that we're doing. So California, in that sense, is showing the way to other states how much they can create jobs through this. So this is not just a way to suck money out of taxpayers. And also, how do we affect the country and the world in other ways, Tim?
Oh, in so many. And one that I'm really happy about is that the Senate just ratified the first climate change treaty in almost 40 years. The world has been meeting to fight climate change for decades. All sorts of important measures have been passed everywhere else in the world. And the United States Senate has said nope over and over again. But just a few days ago, they passed what's called the Kigali Amendment that will require dramatic changes in hydrofluorocarbons, which are a particularly potent greenhouse gas that's used for things like refrigerators and air conditioners. There are better, cleaner chemicals we can use. Now, that kind of leadership is essential. The United States is one of the world's largest economies. It's the source of many technological innovations. And the way that we've dragged our feet about leading on climate change is frankly embarrassing. Governor Jerry Brown used to talk about this a lot, and he would attend international conferences to say, well, I can't speak for Washington, but here in California, we're all in. And the fact that California has taken that leadership role has, I think, prompted the federal government to say, hey, we need to do more of this. People are watching, they're seeing that it works, they're seeing that California is just thriving, and they're finally catching on that there might be something to this, that the green economy can be a winning bet. So I think you're going to see that process accelerating.
So you wanted to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, the name of which, well, okay, but really it's the Climate Change Mitigation Act, right?
It is, and I won't get into the reasons why it was called that. The politics are kind of arcane, but it is a huge new change. It provides $749 billion for green projects. $369 billion, almost half, is actually that's a little more than half, I think, is for emissions reductions activities. And some of that will go for things like compost facilities and other things that we're doing in the states and cities and counties that could use a little help. Things like when we're building roads or bridges or buildings, using new kinds of concrete that are created using technologies that don't produce the same amount of greenhouse gas as the way we've produced concrete in the past. And on and on and on. It just provides that kickstart to all those new green technologies that are being invented, mostly in the United States, often here in California. But it provides that seed money to roll those things out and make them really take off. And, once you get that started, the rest of the world says, wow, this is great. We're going to do it too. So very exciting to see.
And Leslie, as far as from the local level, have you seen anything in this this new bill that is exciting for what local cities will be able to take advantage of?
Definitely. There's, I think so, as Tim started to say, the investment in, like anaerobic digestion, and there's so much that people can get involved in. And, whatever your interest is, whether it's transportation or energy or solid waste or water, it's really an exciting time to get involved. The city of Santa Cruz just passed our new climate action plan. Dr. Tiffany Weiss-West brought that forward, and council just voted on it. And so there's so many great things in there, that people can do to get involved, and they can sign up for Bright Action to compost or ride your bike or so many great things. So I think I would just say it's a really exciting time, and there's so many different ways people can get involved, and we can't give up. Things are really just starting to turn around. I think people are seeing the energy and the enthusiasm of the opportunities, government meeting and corporations getting involved. So every little bit does help, and I think there's a way for everyone to contribute.
I really appreciate what you said about I guess addressing the emotional level of this. Because a lot of, I teach kids, teenagers mostly, and also younger kids, and I have seen such despair from them about how we're just screwing things up for them, and there's no sense of optimism from so many kids. And it's so important, because any teacher will tell you this. We all know this. Any entertainer will tell you this, that when people feel a sense of shared purpose, especially if it's an optimistic shared purpose, that this also works with a negative shared purpose, unfortunately, but let's just talk about an optimistic shared purpose. It is what gets people to act together and do things. When people feel pessimistic, that's when they sit back and don't do things.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's part of why I'm constantly talking about all the good things that are happening. I
Yeah.
want people to understand that it's possible and that there's a lot of reason for hope, where we're moving in good directions. And I encourage everybody to get involved, like Leslie said, in whatever way you can.
Okay. So Tim, also, there's been all sorts of other stuff that one thing that I'm really interested in is all of the interesting technology that we don't have yet. And I wondered if you had any examples. The one that comes to me, I read an article about this unbelievably cool and low-tech energy storage idea that some, I can't remember which Nordic country they were from, a couple of guys realized that you can use really low-grade sand, not the kind of sand that we need for construction, but the low-grade stuff that nobody wants, to store heat. And so during the sunny times, you store the heat with, from your solar panels, and then when it gets cool and dark, you use the heat. And I thought about that because of the fact that they're building this big battery storage facility down on the coast, and have you heard of other things like that have tickled your imagination?
Yeah, there are a lot of exciting ideas. And just to elaborate on what you were saying, of course, that the downside of solar power is that it doesn't work so well at night. Mm-hmm. So everybody's trying to figure out, well, how can we store that energy during the day so that we can use it at night? And there are a lot of exciting possibilities coming up, like the one you mentioned. But another way to approach that is to focus more on how we can generate energy at night. And the wind doesn't stop blowing at night. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that California will be doing is investing a lot of money in new offshore wind platforms. We'll be seeing windmills going up in areas of the coast that are not environmentally sensitive. And studies have shown that you can produce energy 24 hours a day, 365 days a year using that. So that's going to be a great backup. We'll get wind energy at night and solar power during the day. And that's something that we can scale up really quickly. It's being used in places like the Netherlands and other places right now. So we know it works, and we'll be seeing a lot more of that. There's also a lot of developments happening with carbon capture, and both the state and federal laws are investing in that. So far, these things are all experimental, but there's hope of developing processes that will actually extract some of the carbon from the air and lock it up in rock or other materials where it'll stay safely sequestered for a long time. One of the things that makes people worry, as you were saying, is that even if we switch to a 100% green economy tomorrow, there is too much carbon in the air right now. It's going to be impacting us for a long time to come. So if we can find a way to draw down some of that carbon, that's going to benefit all of us and the whole planet. So we're going to be seeing a lot of investments in that. We should be hearing a lot of news on that front. And I'm hopeful that they're going to find the winning technology soon.
Well, I wanted to thank you both. I realized, oh my goodness, look at the time. I can't ask another question. I had more questions. But I wanted to thank you so much, Leslie O'Malley, City of Santa Cruz Waste Reduction Manager, and Tim Goncharoff of Clements Environmental. I have learned so much, and I am sure our listeners have too.
Thanks, Suki.
Thank you. Thank you.